Welcome to Life Burst.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Sarah.
Today, another real life story of the boy next door coming at you.
This is Life Burst. Thank you for joining us today, whether you're listening online or watching us or streaming us through wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you for joining us.
We love to share real life stories here at Life Burst. We've all got a story to share. And today, our guest here speaking to us on Life Burst is Josh. How are you, Josh?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you, Matt?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for joining us today and sharing a bit of your story. Take us right back. Where did life start out for you?
Yeah, so I was born and grew up in Nairne, in the Adelaide Hills. So that's just out of Mount Barker, and that's where my story began. Yeah.
What type of things did you do when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I was there till I was 17, all the way through from lots of mucking around on push bikes, going around the town. Nairne and the Hills was a very different place back then. I still remember riding my bike into Mount Barker on Bald Hills Road when it was 100 zones. Now it's 60 the whole way. So much smaller town, much different place, the Adelaide Hills, back when I was a little kid. Yeah.
And growing up, brothers and sisters, siblings?
Yeah, so I've got one elder sister and three younger sisters. So I'm well versed with girls and female stuff. So that certainly was interesting and challenging. But yeah, I guess that's the way it is. You don't get to choose your family, do you?
No, you don't. How did you go being the only boy? Did you find you blended in and did what they wanted to do, or did you often jump on the bike and ride into Mount Barker just to do your own thing?
Yeah, I sort of got along fairly well with my sisters. Some of them were a bit tomboyish, so that kind of worked in my favour, I guess, for like playing in the creek or going bike riding or whatever. So, yeah, but then, of course, as they got older and we all became teenagers, it all changed a bit at that point and, went our separate ways a bit more.
What type of things did you learn from your sisters that you don't think anyone else learnt growing up who didn't have sisters?
Well, my wife says that I'm good at, handling her emotions and stuff like that. So I guess I probably learned some of that off my sisters, that kind of thing.
Okay, so there's some encouragement for other boys who are surrounded by women in their household that it's going to set you up well for life to come.
That's right, yeah.
Awesome. So you talked about going down the creek, some of those things back in a country town. Were there some adventures or some stories that you could share from those childhood days?
Yeah, probably one of my favourite stories was the time that I got one of those tubs with the little wheels on it. And me and a mate decided to sit in the tub and cruise down the biggest hill in town. Which worked well until about 3/4 of the way down, and the tiny little wheels had actually completely worn away in going down the street, and we just sort of came to a halt. But that was certainly pretty funny. And I don't think we gave the tub back to Mum. I think we just sort of ditched it somewhere. So I don't know. I can't remember how that went. That maybe went badly, but the cruising down the hill was definitely fun.
Right. You blocked out any of the rest of that.
Yeah, it's gone.
And schooling, where'd you go to school as you grew up?
Yeah, so I went to St. Mark's Primary School as a kid, and then Cornerstone College past that. So fairly simple story there, just the two.
Yeah.
And when you were at school, did you have any idea of what you might want to be when you left?
no, like really, I think it wasn't until like, I don't know, year 10 or year 11 when I finally realized that, you know, I would have to get a job and do that job. Everyone was like, oh, what are you going to do? And I was just like, I don't know. So I kind of almost fell into my first job a bit. So yeah, that was pretty funny actually. I was studying at the TAFE and down in the city, and I got some work experience, a work experience position as part of the programming course I was doing. And that just became a job at the end of the 4 weeks. They're like, hey, do you want to keep working for us and we'll pay you? And I was like, choo-choo.
Brilliant. So leading up to then, did you have, what were your hobbies through, so as you became a teenager, were you really into sport? Were you academic? What were your things that you really delved into?
Yeah, no, just electronics and computers was my thing. So pulling apart electronics, not putting them back together again, usually to the frustration of everyone else in the family. I don't remember it particularly well, but Mum tells me at the time I pulled the VCR apart and then it was in so many pieces it couldn't go back together, and it was kind of like a new VCR, and that didn't go down well from what I've been told. I don't actually remember it. So
Our producer is laughing so hard at your story right now, and we can hear him through the wall.
well, they eventually ended up buying old secondhand electronics for me to pull apart as a kid. So that's pretty funny. I do remember the time that I zapped myself pretty bad with 240 because I was working on a printer that I was trying to turn into a robot, because the printer goes back and forth, and I thought, I wonder if I could get that to do something, to like go back and forth when I wanted to. So, but yeah, I was fiddling with it and it just like zapped me and pulled the power out in the whole house. And Mum and Dad came running because they'd been watching a movie, and they're like, are you okay? Are you okay? I was like, ah. So I didn't get hurt, but I was pretty frightened.
And did you ever after that pick up the job again? Did you create that robot out of the printer?
No, I actually never successfully got the printer. I could get to go back and forth, like I could get the software part working, but as soon as I pulled the arm out of the printer, it stopped working, and I was so I could only get to work in the printer, which then wasn't really what you want, because you want.
So for you. You obviously had a real interest in how things work and tinkering. That's something that you developed pretty early on.
Yeah. So I started learning to program computers at about 10 or 11, I think. And I've been writing software basically since then.
Right.
So it started off as a hobby, and then it became this programming course, and then it became a job out of high school, basically out of TAFE, kind of straight out of high school. I actually dropped out, which is pretty funny.
He's still talking. I want to know before we move on to that part that you've just mentioned, did you build anything successfully that didn't zap you, that didn't blow up your house, didn't hurt anyone else? Did you actually build anything successfully?
I could never get robotics and hardware to really do what I wanted to do. I ended up just a software guy, just making programs for stuff. Like little games and other things and all sorts. Lots of games when I was a kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh.
And now I work in that industry. So yeah, there you go.
And this is Life Burst here with Matt and Sarah, and we'll be back straight after this. We're chatting with Josh here on Life Burst with Matt and Sarah. So Josh, you dropped out of school. What happened?
Yeah, so I found school very difficult. I wasn't finding school difficult as in too hard. I was actually finding it difficult as in not challenging enough. So that end up turning into behaviour that looked like, mucking around and stuff. And Mum eventually realised that I was just bored. So they ended up giving me some additional classes and stuff. Like I went upper level for a couple of subjects. But out of all of that, I still must have missed the mark or something, because at the end of year 11, I just dropped out anyway. Even though I completed 2 subjects of year 12 at that point. So I could have just done like easy peasy year 12, but I dropped out. So I ended up going from there straight into a TAFE course in Mount Barker for a little while. And then the second half of it was in the city. That's, like I said, that turned into a job. But it's kind of interesting. A lot of people have this notion or idea that you've got to finish school and then you've got to go to uni and you need that to get a good job. But there's other pathways as well, and I think that's important to remember, that there is other ways.
Yeah.
Other jobs.
So just take us back to that, your experience at school. Like you said, for you, whatever other people might have seen in you, it was ultimately because you were bored or not being challenged, and it just wasn't fitting. What would you say to others who are kind of in that situation, or others who maybe have kids who are going through that?
Yeah, well, I'd probably say, just because a kid's mucking around, it's not necessarily that they're a naughty kid or a bad kid. There's lots of stuff that can trigger that kind of thing. So, and likewise, if as a kid, or if you've got a kid who just doesn't fit with school, there are plenty of alternatives. I know that there's like TAFE courses, and there's Vox or whatever they call it these days. Lots of different programs that exist. So, and in fact, like tradies, a lot of people think, tradie is like, not a good job or whatever. But tradies choose a lot of their own hours. They can earn good money and stuff. Like electricians always earn good money. Well, when you have to pay for them, they must be earning good money.
Yes.
So, I think that like tradies are, for example, a good example of a job that people can do without necessarily finishing school or going to uni, and still, have a good, fulfilling life.
Yeah. And how did you sort of fall on the particular TAFE course that you did? Like, of all the tinkering you'd done, all those kind of things, how did it, you'd done a little bit of programming. Was that just kind of the option that, of all the options, just seemed like something you could fall into? There was a better alternative than school? Or at that point, had you started to say, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I'd kind of realised that I was fairly decent at programming, and that probably could turn it into something else. And I guess it was a chance to formalise something that I enjoyed doing anyway. I don't remember the TAFE course being that challenging. It was more like formalising some stuff I'd done already. So, I guess that was a good thing there, that, to get, I've got some qualification, but I didn't even go past certificate 4. So, just this job came along, and I found myself learning more in what I was doing with the job than I was in the TAFE. So I dropped out of the TAFE, just went from there.
I'm interested to know what year this was all taking place, and what this, like everything you're talking about, looks like, because technology changes so quickly. What did programming look like back in whenever this all unfolded?
Yeah, so my first programming ever was when I was 10 or 11 years old. So I turned 33 on Friday, so I'll leave your viewers to do the math for what year that is. But I was programming, DOS programs using a language called QBasic, if anyone maybe has heard of it.
Wow.
It's like a slightly better version of what you'd have on an old Commodore. So that was my origins, and none of that maybe makes sense to anyone potentially as well. I'm sure some of your viewers know what I'm talking about.
I understand what you're talking about. My father was
Excellent.
very versed in that. I was always so amazed at how he would sit down in front of a computer and just do that. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. I never learned how to do that. I left that to him and people like you instead.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Well, mum and dad had a 386 with DOS, and then I got myself a 486-33, which was very exciting.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Okay, so how has
28K.
programming changed over the years then?
Oh, the power that you've got on the computer is like ludicrous these days. Like, just basically infinite capacity for what you can do. So, like on the older machine, you could do a few million operations a second, and now you can do like tens of billions of operations a second. And that's really changed. Where you used to try and build things as efficiently as possible to make the computer efficient, but that would take a long time, a lot of development time to get that right and efficient. And these days, modern programming doesn't really care about that as much as it probably should, and tends to just make code as developer efficient, as in not like the program itself is less efficient, but you're producing it quicker because computing hours cost less than developer hours.
Right.
So at work or whatever, it's not necessarily efficient for us to spend 10 hours optimizing something, which will only save a couple of cents of like computer time, but you spend hundreds or thousands of dollars of developer time. It's not worth it.
Okay. So for those for the uninitiated, when you're programming, what are you programming? Like what's the outcome? Well, particularly today, what are the kind of things that all this stuff that happens in the background? What are the results on the end?
Oh, so basically, I write software in a language, in a special language called a programming language, and there's a lot of different programming languages. So I mentioned QBasic earlier, that's one of them. And it's a combination of like English parts and also lots of symbols and stuff like that. And that's basically telling the computer all of the different instructions of what you want to do. So I'm not actually writing directly for what the computer uses. That programming language gets converted into something the computer can actually read. I guess read is an odd term, but yes, and understand and execute.
So it's a lot like learning another language and being able to then process that and write that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just basically a text file with all the stuff you want to do, or more than one text file when the program gets bigger. Yeah. So, and then things like websites, like my job is to build the back end of a website. So not all the pretty graphics of what you see, but behind the scenes, every time you click a button or a page comes up or something for that site, our software has like generated what should be shown on that page, what content comes out and all the rest.
That's a very big job to.
Yeah. So that, our main product that are working day in, day out at work, it's 250,000 lines of this source code that's like spread over 40,000 files or something. So it's this whole like big thing that's running this website day in, day out, 24/7.
Right. So in practice, is there just a lot of looking at screens of this different language and just writing, typing, changing things, or is it a lot different nowadays?
No, a lot of my work is sending emails.
Right.
So I'm in a management role now. So I do coding, but I also am running a small team of a few other developers. So it's lots of emails from customers or emails from other people in the company. And they're like, oh, we need this software to do this. And then I've got to schedule, okay, well, I've got these developers, they're busy on this job and that job and the other job, but I can do this. I can get them to work on this next feature or whatever in 3 weeks' time and that kind of thing. Lots of phone calls and emails and stuff. And then you get annoying things like, some third-party vendor, they change some part of how their system works and you've got to change your system to talk to their change properly. Sometimes it's only a day or two's notice as well.
Yeah. Well, Josh, we'll come back and chat more about that. We're listening to Life Burst with Matt and Sarah. We are chatting to Josh about his story and all the things he got up to leading up to now. But Josh, take us back to when you were younger, when you started TAFE, outside of the world of programming. What are other things that you got involved in?
Yeah, so we when it rains it pours, yeah. So I started TAFE, and at the same time we moved to Mount Barker, and at the same time we actually changed church, and it all happened in about 3 months. So that was a really chaotic time for me. But the new church that we started going to, which we have only just left, and that's another story for a little bit later this segment.
It's a very exciting one too.
For example, we'll get there. So that was really exciting time for me. It was a bit of a bigger place, lots of young people, lots going on there that was really exciting, and they were just doing heaps of really cool, interesting things, some youth group stuff. I was a bit too old for the youth group. I was just coming out of sort of that younger age. We did some young adults things, but I ended up also doing a lot of serving in the church, which sort of went through. I think I was really just trying to discover my faith a bit. I was probably focusing on what I could do for the church more than what I was in Christ, what I am in Christ. So I think sometimes people get a bit lost in serving, and that happened to me. I ended up jumping from thing to thing to thing. So I did sound and light, which I actually really really grabbed onto the computer and stuff for the sound and light. But then
You wouldn't say so, Josh.
yeah, there you go. It's grown into a passion for sound stuff. I've got my own sound rig and stuff now. Anyway.
Cool.
Nice.
But then I don't know. I was doing everything. I was doing cleaning roster at one point. I was doing tea and coffee. I was doing kids program. I just went in and everything, and sometimes for like 2 months or something, and then I was just like, yeah, no. It's pretty funny. I think basically 2/3 of the signal cables that went from the sound booth to the stage at that facility I pulled myself by climbing in the ceiling. So, there's a bit of legacy there. We were at that church for many years and deeply involved, and I still really like the place. So yeah, sorry, I'm tangenting.
That's okay. What does faith look like to you, and faith in what?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. It took me way too many years to realize that who I am in Christ, where I stand in Christ and my salvation isn't dependent on anything other than the fact that I'm saved. So, like Jesus, he declares his love for us and our salvation, and we accept that, and then full stop, it's done. And I think for many years I was works driven. I was like, I have to do enough for God or something. He doesn't need us to do anything for him. He's God. Like, what a silly thing to say. I need to do enough stuff for the church so that it helps God out. No, if God wants to just completely transform a town, he will. He wants to do that with us. He wants to invite us on that journey, but he doesn't need us to be there for that to happen. He doesn't need us to make the world changed. He can do that on his own. He just wants to invite us because, it's more fun than doing it on your own. It's like inviting a friend around to do gardening together. You're not inviting him because you need their help gardening. You're inviting him because it's pleasant to do gardening together. Or more importantly, it's pleasant to see your friend. And while you're seeing your friend, we might as well do some gardening. God doesn't need us. And once I learnt that, everything changed. It suddenly was I'm who I am in Christ because I am who I am in Christ. It's got nothing to do with what I do or don't do. It's anyway, I could go on. I could definitely go on.
It's fine.
That's beautifully put.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is actually really, really well put. So what would you say to people who are challenged by what you're saying, whether it be negative or positive?
Look, I'd say God made you who you are, regardless of who you think you are, and regardless of what you do, and he loves you exactly as you are. So, don't try and be something else or act something else or do something else to make yourself acceptable to Christ. You already are acceptable to Christ. You were created acceptable to Christ, just not because of who you are, but simply because you are who you are, and that makes you acceptable to Christ. He made you acceptable just from day one. Yeah, I might be going around in circles, but yeah.
That's good. So Josh, did that mean for you that you, once you realized that, you stopped helping people, you stopped serving, you didn't need to do that stuff anymore?
Absolutely.
You did? Yeah. Right.
Just
Yep.
waiting for that.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Right, end of story. We're done now. Bye.
So how did that play out from there?
Yeah, so just because we're invited to garden with Christ, yeah? So if I did nothing, I would still be acceptable to him. But I can also feel encouraged to do stuff for the kingdom, for Christ, for God, for people. So I've stopped trying to think about, I'm doing something for the church or I'm doing something for Christ. And I sort of think more like, okay, how can I make the world a better place? How can I make what can I do to make other people's lives better or to make the world more better and less sucky? So, for a period of time there, I was running a youth group in Mount Barker. We had a real focus on young people in disadvantage. It's kind of a garbage bit of language because saying, oh, you're in disadvantage, you're like kind of boxing people into that. But nonetheless, that's where our focus was. We really wanted to help people, help young people who maybe were feeling a bit hopeless, maybe were feeling a little bit lost, to really have a place, a part of their life that they could call their own, that was defined purely by us just loving on them. Really, that's difficult language sometimes, but we were just really wanting to have a space there where people could come and feel safe and receive like Christ's love. It's not like, not to be interpreted as physical or affectionate or anything like that. It's not like that. It's just like caring for people. So we ran that for a few years. It's a hugely difficult thing to run. I started out at that program not as the main leader, but as just one of the people that's running the program. And then through a few different things that occurred, ended up being the guy, just sort of accidentally fell into the job of being the guy running it. And it was probably through that program that I was learning this thing about works versus identity. So I started that program believing that I had to do something for the kingdom, and ended that program realizing that I didn't have to do anything and that I was doing something for the kingdom because it was the right thing to do. So that was a huge journey that I went through that happened to coincide this youth program. But yeah, it was very cool. We had a bus. We'd go around and pick people up. When I say bus, I mean a old van which broke down often. And we'd pick them up and we'd take them back to the hall that we were hiring, and we would play games and we would do dinner and we would talk with kids, and we had an Xbox and we just had fun, simple activities for a couple of hours on a Saturday, and then we'd drop them all home. And it was brilliant and difficult all at the same time.
Nice. I love that. This is Life Bursts with Matt and Sarah. We're chatting with Josh, and when we come back, I'm going to be asking him about a certain special lady in his life, so stay tuned. This is Life Burst. We're chatting with Josh, and I just have to ask about your side of the story about how you met your now wife. You can skip back a few weeks online and catch up with us wherever you get your podcasts from, and on YouTube and Facebook as well, to hear Jessie's side of the story. But let's hear your side now, Josh. How'd you meet Jessie?
Well, Jessie and I have corroborated on this story. No, I'm joking. So I met her at a youth thing of some description. I think it was just some of us hanging out rather than some formal event. We were at the Mountain pool, and we were playing a dumb game called Pass the Parcel, where you carry a person around from spot to spot.
So far it's lining up. So far it's lining up. Yeah. Okay.
Consistent.
Yeah. And she was handed to me. That's the official story we go with.
Good.
I had my eye on her a bit anyway. She was friends with my sister. Eventually, I convinced my sister to invite her on our family Christmas holiday that we were going on as her friend, as my sister's friend. Yes. Then it was all over at that point. So my sister was actually pissed at me because I kept stealing Jessie away. That created quite a bit of angst. But, A led into B. And then after the holiday, I sat her down and asked if she'd like to be my girlfriend. So it's all history after
And what
that.
did she say? Did she say yes or no or maybe or?
I think she said yes. And then we had dinner with her parents that night because we were in Mackie. So I met the family and invited the girlfriend and everything all in one hit. Definitely recommended.
Nice. So you were still pretty young, both of you back then. So how did things unfold from there?
Yeah, we dated for a few years. Jessie was still doing year 12, I think. I'd just moved out of home. I lived in a shabby little unit in Mount Barker, and that was lots of fun. And yeah, we dated for a few years, and then I proposed. Probably a life hint I'd be there, if I want to give anyone a hint, is make sure your proposal's not lame.
Yeah, unlike the
Mine was
anyway.
Good tip.
Yeah, good tip. Don't be lame. Yeah.
Okay, so if people have watched this before, they will already know about your proposal and why you're making that comment. But if they haven't,
So I'm guessing Jessie complained about it.
how did you propose to Jessie then?
Lamely. No, I'm a fairly low key person, but in retrospect, I shouldn't have been low key here. Anyway, in this department.
Right.
No, I just proposed at home, like on the couch.
Yep.
I said some nice words and stuff, but probably should have done like, dinner or garden or flowers or something. So low point in my relationship.
You could only go up from there, can't you? Obviously.
Well, that is true. And, at least I wasn't setting some expectations or whatever.
You're a wise man.
Part of my thought pattern maybe was you spend most of your life, like as a married couple, whatever, sitting at home on the couch or like doing life together rather than these big dramatic moments. And I kind of always thought that, I don't know, proposal and marriage is just an extension of that. So it makes sense to do it like that. In reality, that's a lie. I was telling myself, and don't do that. It's a bad idea.
Look, you're full of gold, and pearls of wisdom, but obviously Jessie at some point either there or later on said yes. Was it there?
It was there, and we then went to Mum and Dad's and had champagne.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, so that picked it up.
Yeah.
I think I redeemed myself without a 10-year thing. I got another ring, a new, more fancy ring, and I did it again. I think it was better. Hope it was better.
And she said yes again?
Well, yeah, I think. Yes. She said yes.
Great. So a few years down.
No. I want to know how he proposed again and how it was better than the first time.
Oh, right. Well, I've had like words to say and stuff and things, and we're in a no. It's censored. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, it was just better than before. That's good.
It's just better than before.
Well done. Yep. That's excellent. So you as you obviously got married.
Yeah.
And then the family grew.
Yeah. So I have 3 little children. They're delightful and wonderful in every possible way.
Excellent.
Would you like to
Yeah,
tell us
so-
more about them? What they get up to? What type of things Dad does with them?
Yeah. So we have, like I said, 3. We have an 8-year-old who's going on 15. We have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old. They're boys, and they enjoy destroying things. Their current project is they're digging a hole in the backyard. They're just digging down. They call it mining. In reality, they're just digging a big hole. So that's really brilliant, actually.
Make it sound so brilliant.
Yeah, I think they're at about 300 mil at the moment. 300 down and about, I don't know, 250 across or something. It's quite impressive.
So by summer you could have a pool.
But yeah, and that's what we want actually.
Yeah.
A nice big pile of mud that we can just sort of sit in.
Awesome.
So
Hey, now,
yep.
now you haven't mentioned this, but I understand that perhaps inspired by your children and with your programming background, that at some point you created a game that was released to the world. Would you like to just share a little bit of that experience of?
I would love to tell you about it. Especially if any of your viewers will cough up $1.50, which you pay for it. It's called Toddler Simulator.
Right.
So
Toddler Simulator, yeah, Toddler Simulator.
Toddler Simulator. So I was inspired by another game was pre-existing and lots of fun called Goat Simulator.
Yes.
And also
Best
inspired by my little children who like destroying things. And I thought, oh, imagine Goat Simulator, but you're a toddler and you go around just trashing the place. I made a prototype. The prototype was fun. I made a real game and it was dreadful. I learned a fair bit about it. Like, we went open world and I realized that my world was probably too large. I had lots of houses you could go into, but they were all just basically copy pastes of each other. And once you'd done one house, there was no point going into any other house because it's all basically the same. So in retrospect, I should have gone a smaller world with more to do, because once you've done like 5 or 10 minutes of game, you were bored because everything else was just a carbon copy of the same. So that was an interesting experience. I learned a lot about, marketing for a video game and distribution and all of those kinds of things. We distribute online. It still earns a tiny little bit of money. Every 6 months or something, I get another $100 or something. But it's not like revolutionary, and the reviews for it are pretty poor. So,
would it be
but
fair
if
to say?
you got to spare $1.50,
Yeah, yes. Is it fair to say that the hours you put in are not being paid for by what you've got back from the game so far?
yeah, I think we put $700 or $800 in buying software and assets and stuff like that, and paying the license for Steam to be able to distribute it, and probably another 500 or 600 hours of development on top of that, and it's earned, I don't know, $1,300 or something.
Right. There you go.
You'll get there. That's okay.
Hey, good on you for giving it a crack.
It's a flop, but it was a learning experience.
You might get another $5 or so out of it, out of people watching this today. Hey, then make it all worthwhile. This is life.
I
Burst.
actually,
Oh, hang on, Josh.
Sorry, what?
We'll come back with more.
Oh, sorry.
This is Life Burst. You're listening to Matt and Sarah. We're chatting to Josh. Josh, at some point you moved from the Adelaide Hills, where you spent most of your life, somewhere far, far away. Tell us what brought about that change.
Yeah, so my wife, my darling wife, found a job in Broken Hill, running one of the churches there. And we talked about it a lot for several months. We went up there and visited, and eventually decided that that's where we felt that God was moving us to. So we packed up and we moved there. So we've been here since Easter.
Right. Which is not very long.
No. So when I was talking about the kids digging a hole, that was in just dirt because it's Broken Hill.
Right. Inspired by the miners.
Yeah, I was about to say.
So it's a pretty cool place. It's decent size and it's remote, but they can't have everything because they have to have everything. So there's plenty to do here, and all the shops that you want and stuff. So it's a cool place. I like it.
Now, there's a part of your story that you haven't yet talked about that we've been talking about off air that you were wanting to share, and it involves your children.
Yeah, so our eldest daughter, she was actually diagnosed a few years ago with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, and that was very interesting to me because as a kid, my parents had some hunch that I had Asperger's or something like that, which is now under the ASD banner. But I was never formally diagnosed. And it's kind of, it was a bit different back then. It was sort of a bit more taboo and not really, the diagnosis wasn't as common. I think it happened with really severe cases, but not with the milder cases. But it was very interesting going through all the learning that we did with our daughter to sort of see some stuff in myself about autism, and that perhaps I haven't been diagnosed, but perhaps I have that as well. And it's really helped me to understand behaviors and stuff, which is really good. So,
yeah, we were talking before about identity and the importance of these things either defining us or not defining us. What's your take on that? Having had that self-diagnosis.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, they really take, if they maybe people with disability or people with trauma or mental health issues, and they take that and they actually build their life around it. They really define themselves by that. They say, oh, I have X, I have Y. I'm not as sure about that. I still will say, oh, I've got ASD or whatever, or I maybe have ASD, but I won't I don't really make that part of my identity. I think I'm more, as a person, I'm more than just my autism. I'm more than just that aspect of my life. I actually exist as I exist regardless of that. It's just a part of my story. It's not actually who I am.
So who do you identify yourself as and in?
Oh, well, I'm the living embodiment of the fruit of Christ, aren't I? We are who we are because of what he's done in our lives, not because of anything else.
Yeah. What would you say to people who maybe have a child who has or hasn't been diagnosed, or someone in their circles? Is there any advice you'd give to them about doing life?
Yeah, so I'd probably say if you maybe have a hunch, you could probably, or if you don't have a hunch but you've got a child that you find is acting in a really difficult manner constantly, I wouldn't be saying, oh, go out and get diagnosed, and I wouldn't be diagnosing either, but I would say, oh, why don't you just do a bit of reading, take a look at some of the ASD behaviours, and then see if it looks like it maybe fits your scenario. But diagnosis isn't that useful on its own. You might get some funding or whatever, but really it's more helpful to say, oh, I'm in this situation or my kid's in this situation, so we maybe just respond a little bit differently in some ways, like some quiet time or some some understanding when they've got particular behaviors. So I think it's more about like understanding than it is about like getting particular strong diagnosis or the formal piece of paper or whatever. But yeah.
So when your daughter got that diagnosis and you started thinking about it, how did that change your faith and your belief in your life and your family's life? Because that seems to be a really big part of your lives. So how did it change?
Look, I think faith and this kind of thing, like some people call it disability, yeah, and I'd say, faith and disability, well, they don't have to create drama, but disability is a really bizarre word for it because I don't think it's disability. It's more like just a different way that you were created. So I don't like pray against autism or whatever. I'd rather say, help me fully understand who I am, and to better cope with the world as I am, rather than, I wish I wasn't autistic. So, I don't know. I don't necessarily have a good answer for you. I'm sorry.
That's a pretty good
That is a good-
answer.
yeah.
That's a very good answer.
It's things that you've worked and wrestled through yourself. And I guess, as you've already sort of alluded to, with a child, it's not perhaps your those foundations that change, but your practices and the way you learn to deal with your family situation, responding to things. I guess they're just different coping mechanisms. Has that been true for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Right on the money.
Yeah. Well, what's next for you, Josh? You're working in Broken Hill. You're doing the work you were doing back in Adelaide, but remotely. What do you see ahead? Is there a Toddler Simulator 2 that's on the cards?
Yeah, so there's some interesting stuff that we're hoping to do with this church going forward. We're just really trying to settle in at the moment, but we've got some programs that we might try and start up, some men's groups or maybe another youth group. So I think that's where I'm going to try and put some energy going forward. Obviously, work's very busy for us all the time. So, and then, try and maybe do some more travel later in the year as well when we get to be able to do that a bit more.
Sounds like you've got a lot of fun times ahead. Ahead there, Josh. Now, a question that we ask all of our guests as we come to the final couple of minutes of our show is if you had one piece of advice to share with those who are listening right now, what would that be?
Yeah, I would suggest that you just got to do stuff with your life. So sometimes as people, we get so caught up with like work and family and even like church and going from A to B to C, constantly like sort of stuck in this loop of doing like living and sleeping. But I think often we end up not really doing stuff that's interesting or exciting or that we're passionate about. And then we miss out and suddenly wake up and, you're 80 years old and you wake up and you realize you've done nothing but work and make money and feed yourself. So I'd suggest people like go out and do stuff like, find a hobby, find something that you're passionate about, do something exciting or interesting at your church, just anything. Like we bought a caravan just to do it up and holiday in it, but it's like you got to do something, you got to make something of your life and enjoy your life and find your passions and do those. So yeah.
Great advice. Go and live it. So thank you, Josh, so much for that advice and for sharing your life and your perspective on it. We really appreciate that. This is Life Bursts.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Matt, and we are really glad that you've been able to join us today. Stay tuned for more Life Bursts episodes wherever you get your podcasts or on radio, TV, so many ways.
Life Bursts is hosted by Matthew Karat and Sarah Freeman, with production by Reese Jarrett and Kay Hoshraw Ozadigan, with additional assistance by Brett Freeman. For more episodes of Life Bursts, go to rawcut.com.au. This is a RawCut production.